video, we are going to play around with an abstract technique with watercolors known as wet on wet. And watercolors are so finicky. I used to not like them, and now I absolutely love them. I love doing the wet on wet technique. So what you're going to need is just some sort of brush. I'm going to use my favorite. This is the Black Velvet Silver Series, and it's a number 12. It's fat and fluffy, and I love it. You're going to need whatever kind of watercolors you have, a spray bottle. I'm going to go ahead and spray down my watercolors so that the pigments can be activating. And if you have a spray bottle, then very lightly spray your watercolor paper. If you don't, you can take some clean water. The water in my mug is not very clean, so I will use this. But you could just come across with a clean brush and clean water and just add a layer of water to your watercolor paper. Make sure that you are using 140-pound watercolor paper. I'm using a Canson watercolor pad. It's really cheap. I'll put a link in the description box to it, as well as my watercolors and my brush that I'm using. You don't have to have the same exact kind, but just in case you want to know, that's what I'm using. So I'm going to try to use like colors that blend well. So what that means is primary colors, which I don't love red. I'm going to substitute pink. It's my favorite. So I would start with just creating a pink background. So you see how soft a wet on wet watercolor goes on. In fact, you can always just squirt it a bit more to move the watercolor around even more. And I'm not using any kind of brush stroke in particular. I'm just moving my brush around. On my watercolor pad. And now I'm going to go to yellow. So if my water kind of soaks into my watercolor paper, I'm squirting it down a little bit more. So I've got my yellow going on, excuse me. And then some of my yellow, I just brush right into my pink, and it gives us a lovely orange. You would not want to put a yellow and a purple together, or a pink and a green together, or you will make brown. So if you want it to be softer, then stick with the primary colors, the ones that make really good secondary colors. I'm going to squirt this down a bit again. Now I'm going to come in with a turquoise blue. And I'm doing the same thing, bringing some of that blue. I need a little bit more water. Bringing some of that blue down here at the bottom. I want it just to be blue. Then when I get into the yellow, these are blending to make a nice green. So we've got a wet on wet technique, and this is going to be our background. I may need a little bit more yellow because my blue sort of ate it up. There we go. And if you want to come down to the bottom and add some pink in to give it a little bit of purple, feel free to do that. So it's still wet. I'm going to come up here and just start making some abstract shapes. I'm using just 3 colors. I'm using opera pink. I can't remember the name of this turquoise, but I will find out and put it in the description box. And a lemon yellow. And I'm using the Winsor and Newton tube paints. If you want to experiment with other colors, go ahead. I'm sort of doing blobs. I guess I started doing kind of a rose, and then I'm like, you know, not everybody loves roses like I love roses. Have a tendency to paint roses every time. All right. So just grab your watercolors and your spray bottle and your paper. Put on some music and play around with this wet on wet technique. It's starting to look like tie-dye, which I love. Just have fun with it. There is no rhyme or reason to what I am painting, so don't try to make it look like mine. Make it look like what you want it to look like. Do circles, do stripes, do blobs. Blobs are fun. But make sure after you are done with your amazing creation that you save this paper. I want you to get into the habit of saving your papers, your watercolor papers. Let them dry, even if you don't love it, because we'll have some fun projects coming up and I'll show you what to do with them. I feel like this is looking like a Kandinsky piece, which makes me love it even more. I'm just layering blue and pink and yellow. So where some of my yellow and blue has made green, when I put the pink down here, I am going to have a little bit of muddying into a brown color, but that's all right. Just keep blending it until you feel like you are done. You may want to get a lot of pages and just do this over and over. You will find it very relaxing. And I just did something, I dripped onto this with my color, so now that makes me want to do something with a darker color. I'm going to dip my brush into a darker blue. I'm going to make sure that it's very, very runny. Then I'm going to just tap my finger on the brush. So it's a darker blue, but it's still in the primary colors. So right here I've got a big puddle of green. You can take your paper towel and just dab up some of that if you have too much water on your paper. You can pull up some of the colors if you want to. Another thing you can do is just take your paper towel and just wad it up. And then come around and dab it. And that'll make marks inside of your paint, which now I'm going to add back some of that crazy dark blue. And since I'm feeling all excited about drips, let's do some darker pink. Don't really have a darker shade of yellow, but I will use some yellow ochre. Which is kind of a mustard color. Oh my gosh, I love this. All right, so I'm going to just stop and let that dry. Your watercolors will dry lighter. Your acrylics, when we get to acrylics, you will find that they dry darker. Your watercolors dry lighter. So if you want to come in and add more drips in just to, as it dries, to darken it back up, then feel free. Seriously, I could just keep going with this. Isn't that beautiful? I have some frames that I get at Michael's when they're 50% off, and sometimes they're 66% off, and they're just white frames. And I take things like this, pop them in a white frame, and stick them on my wall. My walls here in my studio are turquoise, and so these just pop against anything. You could just turn it like this. You can keep turning it around, decide what you like, hang it up, or save it like we were talking about for your stash for some upcoming projects that we're going to do on this channel. So if you like this lesson, make sure you subscribe to our Masterpiece Society channel and like us, give us a thumbs up, and cannot wait to see some of your work